For 8 months, my blind son and I slept in a van behind a church on Broadway, while my dead wife's family popped champagne inside a hotel built with furniture I carved with my own 2 hands. Her sister looked me in the eye at the funeral and whispered, "Keep your little toolbox." Then on a freezing night, my wife's voice crackled through a broken radio, and the people who stole our lives were about to lose everything they ever owned. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I go any further, I want to ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below and tell me this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything you had? Tell me your story. I read every single one. Also, please note that this story contains some fictionalized elements added for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real events is unintentional. My name is Eugene Whitfield. Most people call me Gene. I am 71 years old, and for 45 years, I was a carpenter. Not the kind that assembles furniture from a box. I mean a real carpenter. The kind who reads wood grain the way a doctor reads an X-ray. The kind who can pick up a piece of hickory, feel its weight, and know exactly what it wants to become. I built things that lasted. Mantelpieces and cathedral staircases, wine cellars, and library shelves. I built the reception desk at the Davidson County Courthouse and the altar at First Baptist Church on Broadway. The very church behind which, on a cold Tuesday in November, my son Benny and I were sleeping in a 2001 Ford Econoline van with a heater that worked only when it felt like it. That particular Tuesday, it did not feel like it. The temperature outside was 23 degrees. I know because I checked the cracked dashboard thermometer 3 times, the way a man checks a wound he is afraid to look at directly. Inside the van it was warmer, maybe 40 degrees, from 8 hours of our breathing. Our breath had fogged the windows completely. From outside, we must have looked like a ghost car, sealed and still in the shadow of the church. Benny was in the back, curled under 3 wool blankets I had bought from a church sale for $4. He was 40 years old, my Benny. But the accident had taken something from him that no surgeon could put back. His eyes were gone, not fully, not like total darkness. He could sense light and shadow, but the color, the faces, the detail of the world, all of that had been burned away on a Tuesday afternoon 12 years ago when a ventilation valve inside a chemical plant failed without warning. He had been bringing me lunch that day, a thermos of Nora's chicken soup. He never made it past the loading dock. I do not talk about that if I can help it. There are things a father carries that he does not put into words. He just carries them. What I will tell you is this. Benny adapted the way a good craftsman adapts to a flawed piece of wood. He learned the world by sound. He could identify a person by their footstep, by the rhythm of their breathing, by the particular frequency of their voice. He kept an old Sony transistor radio with him the way other men keep a wallet. Country music, mostly. He said it was the only genre where the songs told you the whole story straight, without hiding anything behind the melody. That night the radio was playing something slow. A woman's voice. A steel guitar underneath it. That particular quality, that great country music, always carries the feeling that someone, somewhere, once heard exactly the way you are hurting right now. Benny shifted under his blankets. "Dad," he said, soft and unhurried, the way he always spoke when he was not frightened. "Are we still camping?" That was what I had told him. Not homeless. Not hiding from the security guards who walked the parking lots along Lower Broadway, looking for exactly the kind of people we had become. We were camping. A temporary adventure. It would be over soon. "Yes, son," I said. Still camping. A moment passed. The radio drifted into a different song. Then he said, "Mom used to hum this one." I turned to look out the window so he would not hear the change in my breathing. I reached into the center console and unfolded the piece of paper I had been carrying for 3 days. In the thin light of a distant street lamp, I counted what we had. $11.50. $3 for enough gas to reach the food pantry on Charlotte Avenue by Friday. $4 for bread and peanut butter. $4.50 as the margin between us and nothing at all. I put the paper away. 6 blocks down Broadway, the Langford Grand Hotel rose against the Nashville skyline. I could see its sign from where I sat, pale gold letters lit from beneath, elegant and cold. The lobby doors, I knew, were framed in hand-carved white oak. I had made them myself 15 years ago. 11 days on those doors alone, cutting each detail by hand, refusing to use a router, because a router leaves a sameness to the grain that a trained eye can always detect. The Langford family had paid me well for that work. Then they had taken everything else. I looked at the van's ceiling. I listened to Benny breathe. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees along the street, patient and unhurried, the way cold always is when it knows it has the advantage. I did not know that 6 blocks away, inside a small safe built into a wall panel that I had installed with my own hands, a dead woman's voice was waiting. Not in a memory, not in a dream, in a recording. And the moment that recording played, the people who had dismantled our lives were going to lose everything they had ever built, right down to the foundation. But that night, I only knew the cold, and the radio, and my son's steady breathing in the dark. It started the day we buried Nora. It was raining, of course, because grief never arrives in good weather. The cemetery sat on a quiet hill at the edge of Nashville, where old oak trees stood over the graves like sentinels who had seen too much and stopped caring. The Langford family stood on one side of the open grave under a canopy of black umbrellas, dry and pressed and perfectly still. I stood on the other side with Benny, both of us getting soaked, because I had given my umbrella to Mrs. Coulter, our neighbor from 3 streets over, who was 82 years old, and had known Nora since she was a little girl. I could not watch an 82-year-old woman stand in the rain. The pastor said good things, true things. He said Nora was patient and precise, and that she loved with a quiet ferocity most people only recognize after it is gone. I stared at the dark cherrywood casket and thought about how I had offered to build it myself. She had told me not to. She said, "Gene, some things you don't need to carry." I had not understood what she meant. Benny stood close enough that his shoulder pressed against mine. I put my arm around him, and he leaned into me the way he had when he was a boy, before the accident, before everything. After they lowered her into the ground, people came and said the usual things. I nodded and thanked them. I remember almost nothing of it. Then, I felt Claudia's arms around me. She came from my right and embraced me the way a person embraces someone on a stage with her back to the crowd, so that everyone could see her compassion. Her perfume was thick. Her voice, when she spoke near my ear, was the sweetest I had ever heard it. "We'll get through this together, Gene," she said. "Family takes care of family." Then she pulled back just far enough to look at me, just far enough that no one else could see her eyes go still and flat and businesslike, the way eyes do when a performance is over and the real conversation has begun. "You should have signed the divorce papers when she asked," she said softly. "Now everything goes to us. That is what happens under the terms of the trust." "I am sorry." I stared at her. "What divorce papers?" She patted my arm once and turned back to the crowd, already smiling at someone across the grave. I drove Benny home through the rain. When we reached the house, there was a new lock on the door, silver and bright, fitted into the old brass plate like something that did not belong. I tried my key. Of course, it did not turn. Martin Langford was sitting on the porch steps. He was 35 years old, Claudia's son, and he had the particular ease of a man who has never once wondered whether his decisions would be cushioned by money. He was holding my toolbox across his knees, the red steel one I had carried to every job for 30 years. He looked at me, the way you look at an inconvenience you are about to resolve. "My mother asked me to meet you here," he said. He stood, held the toolbox out for a moment, and then simply opened his fingers. He did not throw it. He just let go. The box fell and struck the concrete walkway with a sound like a rifle shot. The latches broke. tools scattered across the wet ground, chisels and marking gauges, and a hand plane I had owned since I was 26, skidding across the concrete in the rain. I had used each of those tools 10,000 times. They were not equipment. They were 45 years of mornings. Claudia appeared in the doorway. She was already inside. She had a folder in her hand. Nora gave me power of attorney when she entered hospice, Claudia said, her voice smooth and reasonable. She had significant medical debt. The house is encumbered. We have had to act quickly on behalf of the estate. She paused. I am sorry, Jean. I know this is a terrible day. I said, that house is paid for. I built the back addition with my own hands. Nora told me we were clear. Claudia tilted her head the way a person tilts their head when explaining something to someone who is slow to understand. Nora protected you from the details. She did not want you to worry, but the situation is what it is. Then Martin glanced at Benny, who was standing at the edge of the walkway with his head slightly turned, listening the way he always listened, completely, the way an antenna listens. Martin looked at him the way a man looks at furniture taking up space he'd rather use for something else. Maybe if he could see, Martin said quietly, he'd find his own way. Not really our problem. Is it? It was not a question. Something moved through me then. It started in my chest and traveled outward into my arms and my hands became fists before I had made any decision about them. I took one step forward. Benny's fingers found my wrist. He did not speak. He simply held on. His grip gentle but certain. And that was enough. He was blind and grieving and standing in the rain on the day we buried his mother. And he was holding on to me because I was all he had left. I could not take that from him. Not for Martin Langford. Not for anything in this world. I unclenched my hands. I knelt on the wet concrete and gathered my tools. The hand plane was scratched. The marking gauge had a bent arm. I set each piece back in the box the way you handle something that has been damaged by someone else's carelessness. I thought, briefly, about the last night in the hospital. Nora's hand in mine. Thin by then, she had turned her face toward me and moved her lips, and I had leaned in close, but the oxygen machine was loud and her voice was barely there. I caught only the shape of words without the sound of them. I had nodded. I had told her I understood. I had not understood. Not yet. I took Benny's arm and we walked back to the van in the rain. That was the last time either of us stood in front of that house. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of cold and hunger and a shame that eats at you from the inside, the way termites work through dry wood, quiet and invisible. Until the day the whole structure finally gives way. I had believed, through all of it, that I had nothing left. I did not know what Nora had been trying to tell me. But the termites were not the only things hiding in the grain. The engine ran for exactly 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard, a small green digital display with a hairline crack across the corner. And I counted each minute the way a man counts what little he has left. At 17 minutes, the van was warm enough to sleep in. At 20, I would have burned through gas I could not afford to lose. So at 17, I turned the key and killed the engine. And the silence came back immediately, heavy and absolute. The cold did not rush in. The cold had never actually left. It had simply been pushed back. And now it returned, the way cold always does, patient and certain, touching the windows first, and then the floor, and then the air around us until it was everywhere again. Benny stirred in the back. You turned it off, he said. Not a question. Not a complaint. Just Benny, cataloging the world through sound the way he had learned to do everything completely and without self-pity. Saving gas, I said. I know, he said. It's okay, Dad. I'm warm. He was not entirely warm. I could hear it in his voice, the careful way he was breathing, the slight effort of it. But Benny has never been a person who volunteers discomfort. He decided long ago, in the quiet way he decides things, that his father carried enough. I climbed into the back. This was our arrangement on the coldest nights. I would tuck the blankets around Benny first, and then I would lie down beside him, and we would share body heat the way animals do without ceremony, because warmth is warmth, and there is no dignity in freezing to death behind a church in Nashville. My body was 71 years old and my joints had opinions about everything. But the back of that van was 6 feet long, and we made it work. We had been making things work for 8 months. I lay on my back and looked up at the van's metal ceiling. In one corner there was a rust spot I had been watching spread for weeks. A slow brown bloom the size of my fist. I was a carpenter. I knew what happened when you let rust go unchecked. I thought about my hands. They were lying at my sides, rough and calloused, the knuckles thickened by 45 years of work. Those hands had built the bar top at the Ryman Auditorium's backstage lounge, a single slab of figured walnut that had taken me 3 weeks to select and 2 more to finish. They had built the spiral staircase at the Crestwood Estate on Belmead Boulevard, 140 steps in white oak, each tread fitted by hand without a single squeak. They had framed doorways that would outlast me by a generation, and carved mantelpieces for families whose children's children would warm themselves at those same fires without ever knowing my name. Now those hands lay shaking slightly in the dark, from the cold and from something else that did not have a clean name. Not weakness. Exactly. More like the particular weight of a man who has built solid things his whole life and cannot understand how he ended up with nothing beneath his feet. There is a failure that comes not from weakness but from trust. I had trusted Nora's family because she loved them. I had trusted the paperwork because Claudia had lawyers, and I had a toolbox. I had trusted that a man who spent his life building things that lasted would not end up sleeping in a vehicle. All of that trust had turned out to be dry wood, beautiful on the surface, rotten underneath. Benny's radio was still on, very low, the way he kept it at night. A pedal steel guitar, something slow and minor keyed. The radio was the size of a paperback book, and it ran on a mix of battery power and an adapter for the cigarette lighter. When the engine was off, it ran on battery. And Benny managed those batteries the way I managed the gas carefully. Nothing wasted. We were both men who had learned to husband small resources with great precision. "Are you hungry?" I asked, though I already knew. "No," Benny said, which meant yes. Which also meant that he understood our situation well enough not to make it harder on me by saying so. I reached into the bag near my head and found the bread. End of a loaf, the last 3 slices, and I had been rationing it because the food pantry on Charlotte Avenue was closed until Friday. I pulled out 2 slices and tore one carefully in half. "Here," I said, pressing half a slice into his hand. He held it for a moment. "What about you?" "I've got the other half. Gene." He only used my name when he was serious about something. "We share. That's the rule. I am sharing." That's what I just did. A pause. Then, gently, "I can hear when you're lying, Dad. I've been able to hear it since I was 9 years old." I put the other slice into his hand as well. We ate in silence, dry bread in the dark. And it was one of the better meals I remember from those months, because he was beside me and he was warm enough, and the world, whatever it had taken from us, had not managed to take that yet. After a while his breathing deepened and slowed into sleep. I lay awake. Through the fogged window above my head I could see the city's glow. The gold and red and white of Nashville pressing up against the underside of the cloud cover. Somewhere down Broadway music was playing. It always was. Nashville does not go fully quiet. There is always somebody somewhere playing something true. I closed my eyes. "I'm going to fix this, Benny," I said very quietly. "On your mother's sawdust, I'm going to fix this." He did not answer. He was already asleep, one hand resting near mine on the blanket, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it, without either of us having to make a point of it. The radio crackled once, searching, the way a radio does when a signal weakens, and then it steadied again, thin and clear, a single note moving through the static like a thread through dark water. I did not know, lying there in that cold van behind that church on that Nashville Tuesday, that the signal was about to come looking for us. The following evening, we went to Memphis Belle's barbecue on Broadway for the heat. That was the practical reality of it. The van's broken heater meant that some evenings we needed to be somewhere with a working one. And a restaurant suited that purpose, because if you bought something, the staff could not ask you to leave. We had learned this. We had learned a great many things in 8 months that I had no desire to know. Memphis Belle's was a narrow place. All dark wood, and exposed brick and framed photographs of musicians who had played there over the decades. The smell when you walked in was hickory smoke, and rendered fat and something sweet underneath the particular warmth that accumulates in a room where meat has been cooked for many years and the walls have absorbed it. Walking through the door from a 20-degree November night felt like walking into a memory of what ordinary life used to feel like. I guided Benny to a booth near the back, away from the entrance. He preferred walls he could orient by a fixed reference point in a world he navigated entirely by sound and touch. I had learned to find him these things without being asked. We ordered 1 pulled pork sandwich and 2 cups of water. The server, a young woman with a tired face and decent instincts, did not comment on the order. She brought the food quickly. I cut the sandwich in half. Benny ate with the quiet pleasure of a man who has learned not to take food for granted. He tilted his face slightly toward the plate before each bite, close enough to smell what he was reaching for, a habit he developed after the accident. He said it helped him understand what he was about to taste. He said losing one sense had opened others he had not known he possessed. The specific weight of different silences, the way a room sounds when it is about to rain, the thing underneath a person's words that tells you whether they mean what they are saying. I watched him eat, and I thought, as I often did, that he was the finest person I had ever known, and that I had failed him in ways I could not calculate. Then the door opened. I did not look up. On the streets, you learn quickly that eye contact is an invitation. And I had become the kind of man who studied his plate when strangers entered a room. What I heard was a voice loud, professionally warm. The voice of someone performing ease for an audience, and the sound of expensive shoes on old wood flooring. Benny's head came up. His whole body changed the way a compass needle changes when it finds north. His chin lifted and turned a few degrees to the right, tracking something I had not yet identified. His hand, resting beside his water glass, went completely still. "Dad," he said. Quiet. Just the one word, but with a particular quality in it. Before I could answer, his sleeve caught the rim of the glass. It was not a dramatic collision. His coordination was generally precise. Years of navigating by sound and touch had made him careful. But the shift in his posture had changed his whole orientation, and the glass caught the edge of his cuff and toppled, and the water crossed the table and fell off the edge, and landed squarely across the shoes of the man passing our booth. The man stopped. Italian leather shoes, dark brown, the kind that cost more than most people's car payments. The water spread across the toe of the right one in a slow, dark bloom. He stepped back and looked down. Then he looked up. Martin Langford was 35 years old and dressed for a business dinner. Charcoal jacket, open collar, at his wrists, a pair of small dark cufflinks turned from walnut wood. I recognized them because I had made them myself on a lathe in my workshop, a Christmas gift the year he graduated college, back when I still believed gestures of goodwill traveled in both directions. He had 2 men with him. All 3 of them were now looking at our table. Martin's eyes moved from Benny to me. Recognition moved across his face from blankness to something harder. A small smile appeared, the kind that uses the muscles but not the eyes. "Gene Whitfield," he said. Loud enough to carry. I'll be honest, I heard things had gotten rough. I didn't expect this rough. I stood up. I put my hand on Benny's shoulder, which was shaking. "We're leaving," I said. Flat. Even. I was surprised by how flat and even it came out, given what was happening in my chest. Martin did not move from the aisle. He looked at Benny with an expression that was almost academic, as though examining something that had been explained to him once and not quite made sense. "Dad." Benny's voice was low. His face had turned slightly downward, the way it did when he was trying to make himself smaller. a habit that had started the year after the accident, when he was still learning how to exist in a world he could no longer see. Was that Martin? Did I do something wrong? I looked at my son, 40 years old, making himself smaller in a restaurant booth. You did nothing wrong, I said. Not one single thing. Martin reached into his jacket and removed his wallet. He took out a $50 bill and set it on the table next to Benny's plate. He did not hand it to me. He placed it the way you place something you are already forgetting about. Get something decent, he said. And maybe a real coat for the old man. He looks like he hasn't been warm since October. He turned and walked toward the back, already talking to one of his companions about something else entirely. The $50 bill lay on the table. I looked at it. $50 meant 3 days of food, 4 gallons of gas, and something that felt almost like breathing room. I could feel the specific gravity of it from across the table, the way money pulls at you when you do not have any. Benny's hand found the back of mine. Dad, he said. I picked up the $50 bill. I held it for a moment, feeling the paper between my rough fingers, the fingers that had built the reception desk at the Davidson County Courthouse, that had fitted 140 oak stair treads without a single squeak, that had made the walnut cufflinks currently on Martin Langford's wreath. I set the $50 back on the table as we walked past it. Outside, the cold took us immediately. You left it, Benny said. He was not questioning me. He was simply noting what had happened. The way he noted everything. Yes, I said. We walked down Broadway, his hand on my arm. Music spilled from every doorway, fiddle and steel guitar and bass, the sound of Nashville doing what it has always done, which is to take the worst things that happen to people and find a melody for them until they become something a person can carry. Good, Benny said. Just the one word. My hands were shaking as we walked, not from the cold. I was thinking about those cufflinks at Martin's wrists. I was thinking about the toolbox on the wet concrete. I was thinking about a locked door and a silver lock that had not been there the morning before. I swore to myself, walking down Broadway with my son's hand on my arm, that I was going to make them understand what they had done. I did not yet know how, but I knew one thing that every carpenter knows: you do not need to see the whole structure to know where the weakness is. You learn to feel for it. You press your hand against the wood, and you wait until the grain tells you where it will give. I did not know that the answer would come knocking at 2 in the morning. It was 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been watching the cracked dashboard clock, calculating how much longer I could let the engine idle before the gas needle moved. It had become a habit in those months, measuring everything precisely. The way I used to measure a board before cutting it. The same attention, turned inward toward survival, instead of outward toward craft. Benny was asleep in the back, his breathing slow and steady under the wool blankets. The radio had gone quiet an hour ago, the battery saver kicking in automatically. The van was still. The particular kind of still that has actual weight to it. I was beginning to drift when the knock came. 3 knocks. Not hard. Not the flat-handed authority of a police officer or the impatient rap of a parking lot security guard. These were measured, deliberate, the kind a person makes when they are trying to be heard without disturbing anyone nearby. I came fully awake in an instant. No drowsy middle ground, the way I had learned to in 8 months. I looked out the driver's window. A figure stood on the pavement beside the van, silhouetted against the lot lights. No uniform, no vehicle I could see parked nearby. I did not roll the window down. 3 more knocks. Patient, unhurried, Mr. Whitfield. A woman's voice, coming cleanly through the glass, calibrated loud enough to carry exactly as far as she needed it to. No further. I know you're awake. I could see you moving. Please. I just need 5 minutes. I checked the back seat. Benny had not stirred. I rolled the window down 2 inches. Enough to hear. Enough to speak. The woman stepped closer into the light. Mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal gray pants, suit that was several grades too expensive for a November parking lot at this hour. She had a leather briefcase in one hand and carried herself the way certain people do, when they are accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room. Absolutely still. No wasted movement, the kind of stillness that comes from competence rather than patience. "My name is Vivian Cole," she said. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. "I'm an attorney. I've been looking for you for 4 weeks." I looked at her. "If the Langfords sent you," I said, "you can tell them there's nothing left to take unless they want the spare tire. I don't work for the Langfords." No explanation. No flinch. Just the statement. Clean and direct. Delivered by someone who knew it was true and did not feel the need to argue it. In fact, my client has spent considerable effort making sure they don't know I'm here tonight. In 8 months, I had become a reasonable judge of people who were lying. There was always something, a shift of weight, a certain careful arrangement of expression. She was standing completely still, her eyes level, her briefcase easy in her hand. I unlocked the passenger door. She came around the front of the van and got in. She brought with her the smell of good coffee and cold air and paper, the particular combination that comes from someone who has spent a long day working with documents that matter. She settled into the seat, opened her briefcase across her knees, and removed a manila envelope without preamble. "How long have you been living in this vehicle?" she asked. 8 months, I said. She nodded, confirming something she had apparently already known. From the envelope, she drew a single document, legal size, several pages, a gold seal at the bottom of the first page. She held it out to me. "This is a property deed," she said. "The name on it is Nora Beaumont Whitfield. Beaumont was your wife's maiden name." I took the document. A street lamp outside threw enough pale light through the windshield for me to read. I found the property description on the second page. A parcel on 4th Avenue. I knew that street. I had watched that neighborhood change over the years. Watched the old buildings come down and the new ones go up. Watched it transform from something people drove around into something people drove to. "Your wife purchased that parcel 12 years ago," Vivian said. "Under her maiden name, specifically so the Langford family would not know she owned it. She built a mixed-use property on the site and hired a management company to run it quietly." She paused. "Mr. Whitfield, that property is currently valued at $9 million. I read the number. I read it again. I looked at the cup holder between us, where a folded slip of paper with $11.50 written on it had been sitting for 3 days. $9 million. Why? My voice came out differently than I intended. Why didn't she tell me? Why are we sitting in this parking lot? If she had this. Vivian was quiet for a moment. And when she spoke, her voice had shifted slightly, still professional, but with something underneath it. Something that sounded like controlled anger on my behalf rather than at me. "She meant it as a lifeboat," Vivian said. "Something you would never need unless everything else failed. She was planning to tell you on your next anniversary. She wanted it to be something she gave you, not something you stumbled onto." She paused. "When she died, the Langfords found the deed in her safe deposit box. They had access through the power of attorney. They have been collecting the rental income since the week of the funeral, $30,000 a month. For 8 months. The math landed on me slowly, the way something heavy falls through water. "The lifeboat was here the whole time," I said. "While we were drowning." "Yes," Vivian said. "And it ends tonight." She reached into her coat pocket and placed a set of keys in my hand. "Master key to the building. The other one opens the penthouse unit on the top floor. It is vacant, furnished, and has heat." I closed my fingers around the keys. They were cold from her pocket, already warming against my palm. "Who sent you?" I asked. "Not the Langfords." "So who?" Vivian closed her briefcase. She looked at me with the direct expression of someone who has been waiting to deliver a specific piece of information and has been careful not to rush it. "My employer has been watching the Langford family for some time," she said. "He knows what they did to you. He also knows what you did for him a long time ago. On a job site in East Nashville. When he had nothing, and you were the only contractor who treated that as irrelevant." She let that settle. He is dying. His doctors give him 2 weeks. Perhaps less. He has refused to finalize his will until he sits in the same room as you and looks you in the eye. The parking lot was completely still outside the fogged windows. I don't know any dying man who would do that for me. I said. You knew him before he had anything worth dying for, Vivian said simply. She reached for the door handle. The building is 6 blocks from here. Your son needs a warm bed, and there is something this man needs to say to you before he no longer can. She looked at me steadily. The keys are in your hand, Mr. Whitfield. I looked at the keys. I looked in the rearview mirror at the outline of my son under his blankets. Then I reached for the ignition. The engine turned over, louder than usual in the quiet, and the headlights came on and lit up the empty parking lot ahead of us. 6 blocks. The longest 6 blocks of my life. And also the beginning of something I did not yet have words for. In the back, Benny stirred. Dad? He said. Are we going somewhere? Yes, I said. We're going home. The building was 4 stories of brick on a quiet, tree-lined street. And as a carpenter, I registered it the way I registered. All structures. The bones first. The proportions. The mortar worked tight and even at every corner. Someone had built this place to last. Someone had cared enough to do it right. Vivian used a key fob to open the garage gate. We pulled in, and the gate closed behind us with a smooth, unhurried sound, entirely unlike every parking structure I had used in the past 8 months. I helped Benny out of the back seat. He stood for a moment in the garage, orienting by sound the way he always did in unfamiliar spaces, cataloging the acoustics of the concrete, the hum of the ventilation, the specific echo of our footsteps against the floor. Big space, he said quietly. Clean. Yes, I said. We took the elevator to the top floor. Benny found the back wall and stood with his fingers resting lightly against it, feeling the vibration of the cable above us. When the doors opened, the hallway smelled of carpet cleaner and warm air, and the particular absence of dampness that tells you a building is properly maintained. Vivian unlocked the door at the end of the hall and stepped aside. It's yours, she said. Go on. I guided Benny through the door first. He stopped just inside and lifted his head, the way he did when he was taking in a new environment, processing the acoustics, the temperature, the slight pressure change that tells a person whether a space is large or small. Then his face changed, in a way I had not seen it change in a very long time. Dad, he said. His voice was different. Softer. It's warm. Yes, I said. It's really warm. He reached out and found the wall, moved his hand slowly along it. There's carpet. And is that a fireplace? I can smell the brick. There's a fireplace, I said. He turned his face toward the ceiling, the way he did sometimes when a room offered him more information than he could process at once. Then he found my arm, and I walked him through it, the wide hardwood floors, the leather sofa, the kitchen with granite countertops and good appliances that actually worked. I stopped at the thermostat on the wall beside the hallway. 72 degrees. The furnace was running somewhere below us. Steady and quiet. I kept my hand against the thermostat longer than was necessary. It was a piece of plastic on a wall, but I could feel the warmth of the air moving through the vent above it, and it was warmth that was not costing me a gas gauge tick. And after 8 months I had forgotten what that felt like. Benny found the bathroom door. Can I? He said. Use all the hot water you want, I told him. He went in and closed the door. A moment later I heard the pipes knock softly in the wall as the water started, the particular sound of good plumbing in a well-built building. Then, underneath the shower, I heard something else. Benny was singing. It was a song Nora used to hum in the kitchen when she was working something old, something she had learned from her grandmother. Half melody and half the kind of wordless sound a person makes when they feel safe and do not need to account for it. The last time I had heard it was in the hospital during her final weeks, when she would sometimes hum it so quietly I had to lean close to her face to catch it at all. I sat down on the edge of the leather sofa. I did not cry. I sat still and listened to the water and the song until the sound had moved through me completely. And then I became aware that Vivian was in the armchair across the coffee table, waiting. "Tell me the rest of it," I said. She opened her briefcase and laid several documents on the table between us. "Your wife inherited a small sum from her maternal grandmother in 2001, Vivian said. "She did not deposit it in your joint account. She purchased this property when the neighborhood was considered a speculative risk, hired a management company, and put every dollar of profit back into the mortgage for 11 years. By the time she entered hospice, the building was paid off entirely and generating $30,000 a month in net income." She paused. "She was planning to tell you on your next anniversary. She wanted it to be something she gave you directly." I looked at the documents spread across the table. 12 years of patience. 12 years of a woman building something quietly in the background, while I worried about contracts and slow seasons and whether we had enough set aside to keep the workshop running. "Claudia," I said. "When she accessed the safe deposit box through the power of attorney, she found the deed immediately," Vivian said. "She understood what it was worth. She also understood that if you knew about it, you would have the resources to challenge everything she had done." Something moved through Vivian's voice that was not quite anger but was in that direction. "The week after the funeral, she filed a court affidavit claiming you had suffered a psychological breakdown and disappeared. She petitioned to be appointed temporary trustee of the asset on the grounds that you were missing and incompetent." "I was sleeping 6 blocks from here," I said. "Yes," Vivian said. "And in 8 months, she has transferred $240,000 from this building's rental income into accounts controlled by the Langford family." She turned a bank statement toward me. Column after column of transfers, dates, amounts, the same recipient line repeating. "The Langford Family Trust. She has used that money to service the family's debts, to fund the operations of the hotel, and to pay the legal team that has been managing Martin's exposure from a workplace incident 12 years ago." I looked up from the statement. "What exposure?" Vivian was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone searching for words, but the quiet of someone who has chosen their words in advance and is being careful with them. "The explosion at the Langford Chemical Facility," she said. "The one that injured Benny." She looked at me steadily. "There are people who believe that event was not simply an accident, that it was the result of a specific decision made by a specific person, and that evidence of that decision has been actively suppressed." She did not look away. "Jean, the Langford family has been paying, with your money, to keep the truth about your son's blindness buried." The shower continued running in the next room. Benny's voice drifted through the door, still carrying that old melody, easy and unguarded. "What are you saying?" I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. "I'm saying," Vivian said carefully, "that it wasn't an accident." The warmth of the room did not change. The furnace continued its steady work behind the walls, indifferent to what was happening in the living room, but something shifted in the air between us, something that could not be unshifted, the way dry wood shifts when a fault line finally gives along the grain. I sat with my hands on my knees and listened to my son sing his mother's song through the bathroom door, and I began to understand how deep the rot really went. Vivian had arranged a suit overnight. I found it hanging in the penthouse closet when I woke. Charcoal gray wool, slightly narrow across the shoulders, but otherwise a reasonable fit for a man who had lost 20 pounds in 8 months. There was a white shirt and a pair of dress shoes close enough to my size that I did not limp. When I looked in the bathroom mirror after showering, the man staring back was unfamiliar enough that I had to look twice. Thinner than I remembered. Grayer. But not, for the first time in 8 months, defeated. Benny was at the kitchen counter eating toast when I came out, his fingers finding the plate with the easy precision of long practice. Vivian had arranged groceries. Real groceries, not the end of a loaf, not peanut butter measured out by the spoonful, but actual food on an actual counter in a kitchen with appliances that worked. "You smell different," Benny said when I passed him. "I showered," I said. "I know. But you also smell like someone going somewhere important." He turned his face toward me. "Are you?" "I think so," I said. I kissed his forehead, told him not to answer the door for anyone, and followed Vivian to the car. We drove out of the city and into the rolling hills south of Nashville, where the properties are measured in acres and the driveways are long enough to need their own names. The estate at the end of the road was built from old limestone, high-windowed and serious, the kind of structure put up by a man who wanted permanence rather than impression. The fountain near the entrance had been dry for some time. The basin was full of dead leaves, and the ivy on the east wall had gone unchecked. These were the details of a house winding down along with its owner. Inside, a nurse led us through a walnut-floored foyer and into a library that had been converted into a medical suite. The bookshelves were still there, floor to ceiling on 3 walls. But the desk was gone. In its place stood a hospital bed surrounded by monitors and an oxygen concentrator that hissed steadily in the corner. The man in the bed was small. That was the first thing that struck me. I had met Samuel Okafor once, 35 years ago, and I remembered him as concentrated energy, compact and quick, a man in his mid-40s who moved through a construction site as though the site existed at his convenience. Now he looked like something that had once filled a larger space and recently been emptied of most of itself. His skin was pulled thin across his face. A clear tube ran beneath his nose, but when he opened his eyes, the man from 35 years ago was still inside them. His gaze found me immediately and held sharp and deliberate. "You look terrible," he said. His voice was careful, as though each word carried a cost he was tracking. "You're not exactly winning any awards yourself," I said. A sound came from him that I identified after a moment as a laugh, short, effortful, but genuine. He made a small motion, and the nurse adjusted the bed until he was more upright. "I told Vivian you would answer exactly like that," he said. She disagreed. She said, "Grief changes people." He looked at me steadily. "It did not change you." "Maybe not on the outside," I said. He accepted this. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked. "Because your lawyer found me in a parking lot," I said. "No," he said. "You're here because of a job in East Nashville in 1989. A small office build-out on Fatherland Street. I had been in this country 4 years. I had borrowed against everything I owned to lease that space. Every contractor I spoke to quoted me a number and then found quiet ways to cut from it." He managed his breathing for a moment. "You found moisture damage behind one of the partition walls. Significant termite damage in the floor joists. You came to me directly and told me. You said, and I have quoted this to myself many times, over 35 years you said, 'The wood is lying to you. It looks fine from the front, but it will give you trouble from the inside of 3 years.' I remember," I said. "You replaced the damaged sections at your own cost," Sam said. "You absorbed the expense and said nothing about it, and you delivered work that is standing today. Every other contractor I ever used found ways to make my problems my problem. You made my problem yours." His eyes had not moved from my face. "I tested a great many people, in a great many ways, over the years that followed. I found very few who would have done what you did." He nodded toward the bedside table, where Vivian had placed a folder. "I own 51% of the voting shares in Okafor Industries," he said. "When I die, those shares enter a trust. I need a trustee to hold those votes for 5 years, someone who cannot be bought and cannot be intimidated. The Langford family has been trying to acquire a controlling interest in this company for 8 years. If they succeed, 5,000 people will lose their employment within a year. I will not allow that to happen, not even from a hospital bed. I'm a carpenter," I said. "Not a corporate trustee. I don't need a corporate trustee. I have a board and lawyers and accountants for the mechanics of it. What I need is a man who knows when the wood is rotten." He held my gaze without effort. "You have known that since you were 30 years old." Vivian slid the folder across the bed table. I opened it. The terms were clear. $50,000 per month for 5 years. 10% of company stock when the trust expired. Specific authority to block any acquisition, merger, or asset transfer to the Langford Group or any connected entity. I picked up the pen. I thought about 17 minutes of engine warmth. About a $1.50 piece of bread divided in half on a cold night. About a hand plane skidding across wet concrete. I thought about Benny eating toast at the kitchen counter, alone. In a building with an intercom system he could not see. I put the pen to the paper. Vivian's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and something happened to her face that I had not seen before from a woman who struck me as someone who had trained herself out of visible reaction. She stepped into the hallway. I heard her voice through the door, controlled, clipped, the tone of someone receiving information they were not prepared for. She came back in 30 seconds later. "They know you're here," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "Claudia filed an emergency protection motion this morning. There are officers on the way to the building right now." She held my gaze. "Jean, they're going for Benny." The pen hit the floor. I did not remember standing. I did not remember crossing the room. I was simply moving through the door, through the walnut foyer, toward the car, because my son was alone and could not see who was coming through the door, and every other thing in the world had just become background noise. I made it back to the penthouse in 11 minutes. Benny was exactly where I had left him at the kitchen counter. The radio playing low. A piece of toast cooling on the plate beside him. He heard me come in and turned. "You're back fast," he said. "Change of plans," I said. I locked the deadbolt and engaged the chain. "Stay close to me for a while. Okay?" He tilted his head at the tone in my voice. "What happened?" "I'll explain everything. Just stay close." He nodded. He had learned, over the years, to follow when the situation required it, and ask questions when there was time for them. That was a particular kind of trust, the kind that does not need the full information to hold. I had never taken it lightly. I pulled up the building's camera feeds on the wall panel beside the door. The lobby was empty. The street outside was quiet. I counted 20 minutes with a cup of coffee I did not taste, Benny at the counter finishing his toast, the radio carrying on with something piano-led and unhurried. Normal. Still possible. Then the panel lit up. 4 figures in the lobby camera. 2 uniformed officers. A woman in a navy windbreaker with a clipboard. And behind them, in a powder blue coat, with her face arranged into something she intended to look like anguish, Claudia Langford. I stood up. "Benny," I said. "Come stand beside me." He heard it in my voice and came without hesitation, his hand finding my arm. The pounding started a moment later, not a knock, a pounding. The flat-handed structural kind designed to communicate that what is behind the door has no option of pretending otherwise. Benny flinched hard. His grip on my arm tightened immediately. Loud, sudden sounds had been difficult for him since the explosion. The association was involuntary and deeply encoded, the way certain sounds are when they have been laid down alongside the worst moment of a person's life. "I'm right here," I said quietly. "Right here." I opened the door. Claudia's performance began the instant the door moved. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled. "Thank God," she breathed. "Oh, thank God he's all right." It was extraordinarily well done. If I had not watched her at the funeral, I might have believed it. The lead officer, tall, neutral. The practiced distance of a man who has been called to too many of these, looked at me with the measured expression of someone executing a procedure. "Mr. Whitfield. I'm Officer Tanner. We have an emergency protective order issued this morning, authorizing temporary removal of Leonard Whitfield from your care pending a fitness evaluation." "His name is Benny," I said. "And he's fine. He's standing right here. He's been in this apartment one night, and he's safer than he's been in 8 months. The woman standing behind you has been stealing from us since my wife's funeral. I can show you the documentation. That's a civil matter, sir. She filed a false affidavit. Step aside, Mr. Whitfield." The APS worker, her badge read Janet Liu, moved past me before I could respond. She crossed the room with the brisk efficiency of someone who has learned to depersonalize these moments as a means of getting through them. Benny heard her coming. He turned toward the sound, his chin lifting. his body going very still in the way it did when he was trying to gather maximum information from an environment that was moving faster than he could process. "Dad?" The steadiness in his voice was gone. "Dad? Who is that? Who just came into the room? It's okay," I said. "I'm right here." Janet Liu reached for Benny's arm. He pulled back. Not aggressively. Reflexively. The way any person pulls back when an unfamiliar hand reaches for them in a space they cannot see. "Don't," he said. "I don't know you. I can't see you. Please don't touch me, Leonard," Janet Liu said, louder than necessary. "My name is Janet. I'm here to help you." "This is help," Benny said. His voice was starting to break. "I'm with my dad. This is the first warm place we've had in 8 months. Dad?" He turned his face in my direction. That precise radar he had developed over 12 years, locating me instantly. "Dad, I can't see what's happening. Tell me what's happening." Officer Tanner's hand closed around my arm. "Do not interfere with this order. He has a traumatic brain injury," I said. The words came out too fast, too tight. "He needs to be able to orient. You have to slow down. You have to let him hear where you are before you touch him. Please, if you just—" The second officer moved to assist Janet Liu. Between the two of them, they had Benny by the arms. He was not fighting. Benny does not fight. He was a blind man, in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by unfamiliar hands, trying to find one fixed point in a space that had stopped cooperating. "No," he said. "No. No. Dad. I can't see. I can't see where you are. Benny. Listen to my voice." My throat was closing around the words. "Listen to my voice. I'm going to fix this. I swear to you, I am going to fix this." Tanner stepped directly in front of me. "One more word, and you're in cuffs." I looked past him. They were moving Benny toward the hallway, toward the elevator. He had one hand extended behind him, fingers spread, reaching for something to hold on to, the way a person reaches in the dark. Claudia stepped aside to let them pass, and in doing so she turned her face toward me at an angle that the officers could not see. The performance was gone. Just for that one moment. The carefully maintained expression of a grieving aunt, the powder blue coat, and the trembling lip, and the hand at the mouth, all of it was simply absent. And what was underneath was not anguish. It was satisfaction. The clean, private satisfaction of someone who has executed a plan exactly as intended. The elevator doors opened. Benny was guided inside. The doors began to close. "Dad." His voice came through the narrowing gap. Smaller now, stripped of everything except its essential frequency. The voice my son uses when he is very frightened and very alone. "Dad, I can hear your heart beating. Don't let it stop." The doors shut. The hallway was quiet. Tanner told me something about a hearing in 3 days and a no-contact order. I received it without processing it. He left. The front door was open, and the penthouse was enormous and silent around me. And on the kitchen counter, Benny's half-eaten toast was sitting on the plate exactly where he had left it. I sat down on the floor. I do not know how long I sat there. The radio was still playing, the same piano and brush, easy and indifferent, carrying on without any awareness that something had been severed in this room. Eventually, I became aware of my toolbox near the entrance. The red steel box with the wire and pliers repair on the broken latches. I had fixed it myself, after Martin let it drop on wet concrete. It was not elegant, but it held. I looked at it for a long time. Claudia thought she had broken me. She thought that by taking Benny, she had taken the last thing keeping me functional. She was wrong about that. She had not broken me. She had removed the one thing that had been making me careful. A carpenter with nothing left to lose is not a grieving man. He is a man with a hammer, looking for the right nail. I stood up. They came 10 hours after the elevator doors closed on my son. I had spent those 10 hours in a chair by the window, looking at Nashville and doing something I had not done properly in 8 months, thinking without the constant pressure of survival interrupting every third thought. Vivian had called to say she was filing for a continuance, 3 days before the custody hearing. 3 days was not much. 3 days was everything. When the door panel lit up, I was not surprised. Martin and Claudia. In the lobby, Martin was carrying a large wicker basket wrapped in gold cellophane. Claudia was wearing a powder blue coat, not the navy she had worn this morning when she watched the officers take my son. Something lighter. Something chosen to read as harmless. I straightened my shirt and waited. The doorbell rang, not pounded. Rang. The polite tone of a person who has already won and knows it. And when I opened the door, Claudia's expression arrived before I could have registered her face. Her eyes filled. Her hand came up toward my arm. I stepped back just enough that she could not reach me without making it obvious. Jean. Her voice was warm and measured. Oh, Jean. We were so worried. Martin set the basket on the kitchen island. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the apartment, the ceilings, the molding, the window view, the kitchen appliances. He was calculating. I could see it moving behind his eyes, the way stress moves through a compromised beam, subtle and steady and unmistakable if you know what to look for. Just a little something, Martin said, gesturing at the basket. Some cheese. A bottle of wine. Those crackers you used to like. We wanted to. What do you want, Claudia? I said. She sat in the armchair without being invited and folded her hands in her lap with the composure of a woman who has been in difficult rooms before. What happened this morning was not how I wanted things to go, she said. I asked for a wellness check. I had no idea it would be handled so aggressively. Benny is fine. He's in a good facility. But Jean, I'm worried about you. And I think we need to talk about what comes next. Martin pushed off the kitchen island. He had found a comfortable posture. The posture of a man who had decided everything in his vicinity was eventually going to belong to him anyway. Here's what we're proposing, he said. We know Galloway Okafor made you some kind of arrangement this morning. Proxy votes. Corporate governance. Look, Jean, that's not your world. You'd be signing things you don't understand. And answering for decisions that have nothing to do with carpentry. We've seen it happen to good people. He spread his hands. What if you hold the proxy officially your name, your legal protection, but I handle the actual decisions? You collect the salary. You get Benny home. You live your life. I looked at them. Then, I looked at the gift basket on the island. Give me until morning, I said. I let my voice go flat. Let the exhaustion I genuinely felt come into my posture. I'm tired, Claudia. I haven't slept. Let me think. She stood immediately. Of course, she said. She touched my arm, and I let her. Call me when you're ready. We'll make this right. We're family. Martin ate one of the crackers from the basket on his way out. I closed the door. I engaged the deadbolt. I stood in the room for a moment, looking at where they had been. Claudia had rested her purse briefly on the armchair, moved around the kitchen island, touched the counter near the basket. Martin had leaned against the island, stood near the window, walked to the door. They had moved through the apartment with the unhurried ease of people conducting a survey of something they expected to own. I began to sweep. I ran my hand along the underside of the kitchen counter. Nothing. I checked behind the sofa cushions. Nothing. I moved to the coffee table, a solid walnut piece, low to the ground, with a finished apron rail around the underside. I crouched and felt along the rail. My fingers found it in 4 seconds. Small. Plastic. Warm from the room. Held in place with adhesive tape on the inner face of the apron. Exactly where it could be fixed without being visible from any standing angle. A voice-activated transmitter, the kind that runs continuously and requires almost no maintenance. The kind a person installs when they want to know what someone is saying without being in the room. I knew this table. Not this exact piece, but the construction, the design, the location of the apron rail. I had built a table almost identical to it for Claudia's private sitting room 15 years ago. And I remembered her watching me attach the finish hardware on the underside, the particular quality of attention she brought to that observation. She had been filing it away. I did not remove the device. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I picked up the gift basket, the gold cellophane, the wine, the aged cheddar, the crackers Martin had helped himself to, and carried it to the stainless steel trash compactor in the corner of the kitchen. I did not unwrap it. I opened the bin and put the entire basket in and pressed the button. The machine engaged. Glass broke. The wicker cracked and compressed. When I opened the bin again, the basket was a flattened disc of mixed wreckage. I walked back to the living room. I stood near the coffee table. I let my shoulders fall. I let the authentic exhaustion of a 71-year-old man who had been awake for 36 hours and had his son taken that morning show through in every line of my posture. I spoke to the room in the voice of a man who has run out of options. Maybe she's right, I said. I'm too old for this. Corporate shares, voting proxies. I don't know any of that. Martin knows that world. He could handle it. I exhaled long and slow. I'll call her in the morning. I'll sign whatever they need. I walked heavily toward the hallway. Footsteps deliberate on the hardwood. Then I passed the bedroom, continued to the service staircase, and took it all the way down to the basement without pausing. Vivian was waiting beside the mechanical room, where the boilers ran loud enough to swallow any frequency. She looked entirely out of place in the dust and pipe fittings with her gray suit and her briefcase. She did not look surprised. You found it, she said, under the coffee table. I built one just like it for Claudia 15 years ago. I kept my voice level. I gave her a performance. She thinks I'm surrendering by morning. Vivian's expression moved slightly towards something that was not quite a smile. That buys us tonight. Which is what I need, I said. I built that hotel, Vivian. I know every service corridor, every hidden compartment, every panel Claudia had me install, because she wanted storage. The cleaning staff couldn't access. I held her gaze. Whatever she keeps in writing, the ledger, the accounts, the documentation, it's in one of those compartments. And the only man alive who knows exactly which one is standing in this basement talking to you. Vivian was quiet. Then she opened her briefcase and removed a small high-definition camera. Then photograph everything, she said, placing it in my hand. Every single page. I took the camera and put it in my pocket. She thinks I'm broken, I thought, climbing back up the stairs. She thinks Benny was the last thing holding me together, and without him, I'll simply stop. Let her think that, because tonight, while she's celebrating in the hotel I built for her, I'll be inside the walls, behind the panels, in every hidden space she doesn't know. She showed me pulling out every nail that holds her empire together. Before I went to the hotel, I made a phone call. I had a number in my contacts that I had not dialed in 12 years, stored under a name I sometimes scrolled past when looking for someone else, always noting it, always moving on, the way you note a door you know is there without trying the handle. I stepped outside the building's rear exit into the cold Nashville night, leaned against the brick, and dialed. 4 rings. 5. Then the line opened. Yeah. The voice was cautious and slow, with the particular texture of a man who had been drinking steadily rather than heavily. Ray, I said. It's Gene Whitfield. A long pause. Not the pause of a man who did not recognize the name. The pause of a man who had been expecting it for a long time and was now deciding what to do about that. Gene, he said finally. I heard about Nora. I'm sorry. I don't need sympathy, Ray. I need to know about the explosion. The silence that followed was denser than the first one. I could hear a television in the background, and underneath it the specific quiet of a man who has been sitting with something in a closed room for too long. It's been 12 years, he said. Whatever you're thinking, they took Benny today. I said. Emergency protective order. They put him in state care because they need leverage. and they need leverage because they're afraid of what I might eventually remember. I paused. I think I remember, Ray. I just need you to tell me if I'm right. A long silence. Glass on a hard surface. It wasn't me. His voice had changed. The caution was still there, but something else had come through it. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a sentence for 12 years without being allowed to say it out loud. Gene, hear that first. It wasn't me. I knew the risk. I documented it. I fought him. Who? I said. Martin. He said the name. The way you say the name of something that has done permanent damage. We were behind on a maintenance cycle. The primary ventilation system in Building C had 3 filters past their service date, a standard replacement job, maybe $2,200 in parts and labor. I flagged it in the weekly report. Martin called me in and told me the plant was over budget, that the filters had another cycle of safe use in them. I told him the manufacturer's specification was clear. I told him we were outside the safe operating window. What did he say? I said. He told me that if I didn't sign off on extending the service cycle by 90 days, he would terminate my contract and call every major industrial client in Nashville to tell them I was the reason his facility was running behind. Ray exhaled long, controlled, practiced. I had 3 kids, 2 in high school. I signed. I stood against the brick and looked at the empty parking lot. 3 days later, Ray said, the pressure in the Building C ventilation manifold reached critical saturation. The intake filter failed under load. The discharge blew the secondary valve. 12 feet of the exterior loading dock wall came apart. He stopped. Benny was on the loading dock, Gene. He was bringing you lunch. The force of the discharge hit him directly. I had known the mechanics of it for 12 years. I had reconstructed the sequence. The way you reconstruct an accident, you cannot leave alone until you understand it completely. But knowing the mechanics had always felt different from knowing the cause. Different in the way that a symptom and a diagnosis are different. Your son's eyes, Ray said, and his voice broke slightly on the phrase, cost $2,000. Gene. A $2,000 ventilation filter. I did not respond. $2,000. Martin Langford had allowed my son to be blinded for the cost of a mid-range appliance. Do you have documentation? I said. My voice was steady. That surprised me. Why do you think they fired me? Ray said. I needed to be off-site before OSHA arrived. They shredded the official maintenance logs. They reclassified the event as a manufacturing equipment defect. A pause. But Gene, I'm an engineer. I wrote everything down. Every conversation. Every order. I printed the emails. I kept the signed service extension document with Martin's name on the authorization line. I've had it in a folder for 12 years. His voice dropped. I was waiting for someone to ask. We met an hour later at an all-night diner on the south side. Ray looked older in the way people get older when they have been carrying guilt for a long time. Smaller. Compressed by the weight of something they have been unable to set down. He slid the folder across the table without ceremony. I opened it. Printed emails. Maintenance logs. A typed summary of the service cycle extension decision, with a date at the top and a signature at the bottom. Martin Langford, written in the loose, self-assured hand of someone who had never seriously considered that his decisions had consequences that could not be managed later. 3 days before the explosion, he had signed off on the bypass himself. He had been so certain of his authority, and so indifferent to the risk that he had put his own name on the document that ended my son's ability to see. I turned to the last page. A photograph Ray had taken of the failed filter housing immediately after the explosion, before the site cleanup crew arrived. The split along the seam was clear and unambiguous. The kind of failure that an experienced engineer reads in a single glance. I closed the folder. My hands were not shaking. I registered this specifically because they had been shaking, on and off, for 8 months. Right now they were still. The hands of a carpenter who has found the structural flaw he has been tracing through the whole building, the crack that started at the foundation and ran upward through every wall above it. I put $50 on the table. "Go home," I said. "Lock your doors. When this comes apart, the shock wave is going to be significant." Ray looked at the money. "I should have come to you 12 years ago," he said. "I'm sorry, Jean. You came tonight," I said. "That's what matters now." I walked out with the folder under my arm, into the cold Nashville night. The hotel was 6 blocks away. I could see the sign from where I stood, pale gold letters, elegant and lit. The same sign I had looked at from the van window for 8 months. The lobby doors inside were white oak, hand-carved, each detail cut by hand. I had built those doors, which meant I knew exactly how to get in without using them. I started walking. The Langford Grand Hotel was hosting its annual charity gala. I could tell from the valet line stretching half a block down the street, from the bass line of a live ensemble audible from the far sidewalk, from the guests arriving in cars that cost more than most people's mortgages. What I did not know until I was standing across the street in the shadow of a shuttered dry-cleaning shop, watching the procession of evening wear and hired smiles, was the specific nature of the charity. The banner across the front entrance read, "Langford Family Foundation, Annual Gala for the Visually Impaired." I stood there long enough to be certain I had read it correctly. Then I crossed the street. I did not go to the front entrance with its white oak doors and its velvet rope. I went around the north corner of the building to a service alley that most guests of the Langford Grand had never seen, because it had been specifically designed not to be seen. I had designed that. As part of the renovation 15 years ago, Claudia had been explicit she wanted the operational side of the hotel completely invisible from the guest experience, and she had paid for that invisibility, which meant she had also paid, without realizing what she was paying for me to know exactly where every invisible door was. The maintenance access panel was set flush into the alley wall, with a 6-digit keypad. Claudia had been cheap about the keypad, the same way she would turn out to have been cheap about the safe she had bought a mid-tier model and never updated the default code. The code was the same one from the installation contractor's original setup, which I still had in my renovation file because I had never seen a reason to throw it away. The panel opened on the second try. Inside was a narrow service corridor running the full length of the building, lit by overhead fluorescence on a motion sensor. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and the ambient warmth of a building's hidden systems, the mechanical warmth that guests never feel, but that exists in every large structure, behind every finished wall. I followed the route I had walked dozens of times during the renovation, past the laundry intake and the secondary electrical panel to the service staircase at the far end. I took the stairs to the 3rd floor. The guest corridor up here was carpeted and empty. The gala noise was muffled through the floor, a low collective sound, the kind a crowd makes when it is enjoying itself at an appropriate volume for the ticket price. Claudia's office was at the end of the east wing behind a door marked Administration Private. The lock was a standard tumbler. I had a pick set in my jacket pocket alongside the camera, and it took me 40 seconds. The renovation had keyed all the administrative locks to the same master system, and Claudia, with the confidence of someone who had never seriously imagined being the subject of an investigation, had never updated to electronic access. Inside, the office was dark. The curtains were drawn. It smelled of Claudia's rose oil perfume, layered over something I had never quite identified. A manufactured pleasantness that had always reminded me of a finished surface applied over wood that had not been properly dried. I crossed to the built-in bookshelf on the far wall. 4 days of work. This bookshelf. The joinery had taken a day and a half on its own, because Claudia had wanted invisible tolerances, the kind of fit that shows no gap at any humidity or temperature. She had also specified, in the renovation notes, a concealed compartment accessible from the 3rd shelf. For private correspondence, she had written, in her small, controlled handwriting. I reached behind the 3rd shelf. My fingers found the recessed latch exactly where I had put it. I pressed it. The panel released with a soft mechanical click, the same sound it had made when I tested it during installation 15 years ago. Behind it sat a small gray safe, residential grade, the kind sold at hardware stores for documents and valuables. I had seen safes like it throughout my career. I knew their common weakness: a low-grade solenoid lock that could be disengaged by a strong magnet placed at the correct point on the door. I pulled the magnet from my pocket and ran it slowly across the lock face. It found the solenoid on the second pass. A dull click, duller than the panel latch. I turned the handle. The door swung open. Inside, bundled cash in rubber bands, a velvet pouch, and a black leather ledger the size of a hardcover book. I set the ledger on the desk and turned on my flashlight. 2 columns, 2 sets of numbers, running through 12 months of entries. The left column was labeled Langford Official. Operating costs for the hotel maintenance contracts, staffing, supply orders. The numbers were high, but plausible for a property this size. The right column was labeled Personal. The figures there were something else entirely. Transfer amounts routed through account numbers I recognized from the bank statements Vivian had shown me in the van on the night this all began. Offshore accounts, monthly disbursements to an entity listed as a property management firm, but labeled in Claudia's own handwriting, small and precise, as ML legal expenses. Martin's legal fees, paid from the rental income of the building Nora had bought to protect us. Paid from the $30,000 a month that had been designated, in the document that was now in my pocket, for the future of a blind man named Benny Whitfield, who had been blinded on a job site, owned by the same family, now using his inheritance to cover up the reason he could not see. I began photographing, page by page. Steady and methodical. The way I had always worked. Not rushed, not slow, but at the pace that produces results that hold. The camera Vivian had given me was small enough to hold in one hand. The flash was silent. I worked through the ledger from the first entry to the last, and each page I turned felt like another nail I was pulling from the structure of what they had built. I was on the final page when I heard it. Heels on marble in the corridor outside. 2 sets. Moving at the unhurried pace of people who have had enough champagne to feel that they own whatever room they are about to enter. A woman's voice. Low and amused. Another voice responding, getting closer. I killed the flashlight. I shoved the ledger back into the safe in the dark. But I had not had time to close the panel, and the footsteps had reached the door. The handle rattled. I moved behind the curtain the way I had learned to move in confined spaces during decades of construction work, without looking for what I could not see, letting memory and touch guide me instead. The velvet was heavy, floor to ceiling, hung on a rod I had specified, and installed myself. I pressed my back against the window glass, and the cold came through immediately, working through my jacket with the patient certainty of November. I stood absolutely still. The door opened. Warm hallway light for a moment, then the door closed, and the room returned to its partial darkness. 2 sets of footsteps. 2 voices. Why is it so dim in here? A woman I did not know. Light with champagne. I prefer it. Claudia's voice certain, amused, carrying the ease of someone in the final hour of a very good evening. I do some of my best thinking in low light. I heard her cross to the credenza. The sound of ice. A bottle opened. Through the narrow gap between the curtain panels, I could see the edge of the room, the desk, the bookshelves, the section of wall where the hidden panel sat not quite flush the way it should have been. Claudia was standing with her back to it. She had not noticed. She was looking at her companion, a woman in a red dress, and her face had the particular expression of someone allowing themselves, in private, to feel what they have been suppressing publicly all evening, not the composed grief of the concerned aunt. The satisfaction. To what? Her companion asked, as glasses were poured. I finally got rid of the dead weight, Claudia said. Her voice was conversational, the tone of sharing pleasant news among people who will not repeat it. My brother-in-law, the old carpenter. You've heard me mention him, the one who lived in the van? The very same. They took the son today. The blind one. She sipped. Gene will fall apart, it's a matter of days. He has no money, no leverage, nothing to work with. When he breaks, he'll sign the Okafor proxy over to Martin without a second thought, because he'll do absolutely anything to get the boy back. And once Martin holds those voting shares. She paused in the way a person pauses before a number they take pleasure in. We will have the largest single consolidated real estate land portfolio in the state of Tennessee. All of it. From one old man who should have learned that loyalty to my sister was not the same as power. I reached for my phone, but isn't that the companion began? Her voice had dropped. Using the boy as leverage. Isn't that? Who is going to believe him? Claudia said. She was not defensive, she was explaining. The difference was important. He is 71 years old. He lived in a van. I have a law firm. I have a physician prepared to testify that Gene Whitfield's cognitive function has deteriorated to the point of legal incompetency. I have people in that courthouse who understand which side of an arrangement is worth being on. She paused. Who is going to believe a senile old man with sawdust in his veins over the Langford family? The record button on my phone was a small red circle. I pressed it without looking down. The money, her companion said. The rental income from his wife's, managed prudently, Claudia said. On behalf of an estate whose primary beneficiary lacked the cognitive capacity to make sound decisions. That is precisely how it will be described in court, and precisely how the documentation reads. She raised her glass to Gene Whitfield. May he find somewhere quiet to be old in. Somewhere far from Nashville. Glass met glass. Come, Claudia said, setting hers on the desk. They're announcing the foundation donation totals shortly. And I need to look moved. I did not breathe. The door opened. Footsteps. The door closed. Silence. I counted to 60. A rule I had learned early in construction: always wait longer than you think necessary. Because moving too soon always costs more than a minute's patience. At 60, I stepped out from behind the curtain. I moved to the safe panel and closed it properly, pressing until I felt the latch seat. I wiped the desk surface and the panel face with my sleeve. I looked around the room in the thin window light, accounting for everything I had touched. Then I crossed to the window. I unlatched the sash and raised it. Cold air hit my face and dried the sweat I had not known was there. Below the window ran a trellis frame, supporting the ivy, on the east face of the building. I had specified this trellis during the renovation heavy-gauge steel, because Claudia had wanted it to carry climbing roses in addition to ivy, and roses are heavier than most people assume. I had designed it to hold 300 pounds of plant material and winter ice load combined. I gripped the frame and lowered myself out. The descent took less than 30 seconds. The steel was cold, the ivy wet. My arms not what they were at 40, but the structure did what it was designed to do. No flex, no complaint. The simple integrity of something built by a person who does not look for ways to do less than the job requires. My feet touched the flower bed below. I looked up at the building. 3 floors above, light showed at the edges of Claudia's drawn curtains. The music was still playing in the ballroom. The banner across the entrance still read, "Annual Gala," for the visually impaired. I put my hand over the pocket where the camera and phone were resting. "Celebrate while you can," I said quietly. To the lit windows. To the gold sign. To the banner across the door. The hangover is going to last a lifetime. I found my car and drove directly to Vivian Cole's office. It was close to 2 in the morning. She was at her desk, which did not surprise me. I set the camera down in front of her and pressed play on my phone without saying anything. Claudia's voice filled the office, easy and certain and completely unguarded, describing in her own words a plan she had believed to be invisible. Vivian listened without expression. When the recording reached the words, "sawdust in his veins," something moved across her face that was not quite anger, but was in that neighborhood. She picked up the camera and began scrolling through the ledger photographs without being asked. When she reached the last page, she looked up. "We're ready," she said. "Yes," I said. "We are." The courtroom smelled of lemon wood polish and something older underneath it. The accumulated smell of a room where difficult things have been decided for a long time, a smell that settles into the walls, the way certain sounds settle into a building's memory. I recognized it because I had helped create it. The oak paneling on the walls of Courtroom 4 in the Davidson County Justice Center had been installed 22 years ago as part of a renovation I had contracted. Tennessee red oak, quarter sawn so the medullary rays would show in the finished surface. 11 days of work, each panel scribed by hand to the existing plaster, because no two walls in that building were truly plumb. The county inspector had come back to compliment it when the job was done. I sat at the defendant's table, put my hands flat on the surface, and looked at those panels. Still standing. Still true. Still doing exactly what they had been built to do. Vivian was beside me, her briefcase open. Across the aisle, Claudia sat with 3 attorneys in matching tailoring. She was wearing a navy dress and a single strand of pearls. She looked like someone's idea of a trustworthy woman. She looked exactly like the kind of person a judge would believe. The Honorable Marcus Thorne presided, a man in his late 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and the measured, slightly fatigued expression of someone who has seen more broken families than he finds comfortable. He shuffled papers. He read something. He looked at the room over his glasses with the particular gaze of a person who has formed a preliminary impression and is waiting to see if anything will revise it. Claudia's attorney, Mr. Hargrove, rose to speak. He was a careful speaker. He did not pace or gesture for emphasis. He simply stood at a slight angle to the bench and spoke with the quality of voice that makes everything it says arrive with the weight of reasonable certainty. He was very good at this, in the way that a craftsman who has learned to work with inferior materials is good at his work by making the deficiencies invisible. Your Honor, Hargrove said, we are not here to punish Mr. Whitfield. His family has no interest in punishment. They are here because the evidence will show that for the past 8 months, his disabled son has been placed in conditions of significant and ongoing risk not by strangers, but by the person charged with his care. He paused to let that settle. The evidence will show that Mr. Whitfield refused, on multiple occasions, assistance offered by his own family, that he subjected his son to winter temperatures in an unheated vehicle, that when approached with a gesture of goodwill, Mr. Whitfield destroyed it in what multiple witnesses have described as an episode of significant agitation. Another pause. This is not the story of a villain, Your Honor. It is the story of a man whose grief overwhelmed his judgment and whose son paid the price. He sat down. The judge nodded and made a note. I watched the pen move. Claudia took the stand. She walked to the witness box with the measured steps of a woman carrying grief, sat, and looked at the judge with eyes reddened by something, tears or drops applied in the courthouse bathroom before she entered. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. What followed was among the most technically accomplished performances I had ever witnessed, and I had watched skilled craftsmen work at the absolute peak of their ability for 45 years. Claudia's voice broke at the right moments and steadied at others. Her pauses were calibrated to the second. Her eye contact with the judge was maintained at a frequency that communicated sincerity without tipping into desperation. I promised Nora on her deathbed that I would look after them, she said. Both of them. She let that settle before continuing. But Gene changed after Nora passed. He became withdrawn, suspicious. He refused every attempt we made to help money, housing, everything. We eventually brought food, Your Honor, because we were genuinely worried about Benny's nutrition, and Gene. Another pause. A swallow. Gene destroyed it, in front of our eyes. And then he threatened my son in a way that left both of us frightened for our safety. She looked at me. A brief look. Carefully sorrowful. I looked at the empty chair beside me. It was where Benny would have sat. He was in a facility on the east side of the city, in a room with strangers, in a building whose acoustics he had not yet learned, waiting for a voice that was not coming. I thought about the van, about the way he managed the radio batteries with the same precision I managed the gas, because that was what we had become, two men who husbanded small things with great care. I thought about half a piece of bread pressed into my hand in the dark, about fingers closing around my wrist at a funeral to keep me from a mistake I could not have taken back. I put my hands flat on the table. I did not look at Claudia. Hargrove delivered his final question with the confidence of someone closing an argument that is already won. "And if the court grants temporary guardianship today, Mrs. Langford, what is your plan for Leonard?" "I will take him home immediately," Claudia said. "We have a room prepared, a full-time care coordinator engaged, and we will ensure that Gene receives the psychiatric support he clearly needs. We will pay for all of it." She lifted her chin by a precise fraction. "We are family, Your Honor. We take care of our own." The judge made a note. He made several notes, and the scratching of the pen in the quiet room was the sound of a narrative being recorded that I could not correct by sitting here silently and maintaining my composure, but that I also could not correct by doing anything other than sitting here silently and maintaining my composure. I was 71 years old, sitting in a room I had helped build, being described as a danger to my own son, and the description was landing the way a false wall lands when it is well made, looking solid, sounding solid, giving nothing away until someone knows exactly where to press. Judge Thorne set down his pen and looked across the room, with the slight inflection of a man moving toward a conclusion. "Miss Cole," he said, "do you have witnesses to call, or can we proceed to closing arguments? I have a full afternoon docket." Vivian stood. She did not look at the judge. She looked directly at Claudia Langford, across the aisle. And she held that look for long enough that everyone in the room understood something was about to change. "Your Honor," Vivian said, her voice carrying into every corner of the room, "we have no closing arguments, because we haven't begun presenting our case. What I'm about to show this court will demonstrate that the real danger in this room is not my client." She paused. "It's the woman sitting across that aisle. The woman who put him on the street in the first place." The courtroom doors opened. Every head turned. The way heads turn when a door opens at a moment that does not call for it. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow unanimity of a room that has just been made uncertain about what it thought it knew. Ray Dawson walked in. He was 64 years old, and he moved like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has been told, today specifically, that he can finally set it down. He wore a gray sport coat that did not quite fit across the shoulders. He held a manila folder against his chest with both hands. His eyes found me first, across the length of the room. He gave me a small nod. I gave him one back. Claudia turned in her seat. Her face moved through recognition, then calculation, and then something underneath the calculation that I recognized from construction, the expression of a contractor who has just understood that the inspector standing in front of him has already found what they came looking for. In the gallery, a chair scraped the floor sharply. Martin Langford rose to his feet. "The defense," Vivian said to the bench, "calls Mr. Raymond Dawson, former safety engineer, Langford Chemical." Judge Thorne looked from Vivian to Ray to Martin, who remained standing in the gallery with the expression of a man confronting something he had been certain he had buried. "Sit down, Mr. Langford," the judge said, "or I'll have you removed." He turned to Vivian. "Call your witness." Ray took the stand. He sat carefully, placed the folder on the ledge before him, and rested his hands on top of it. He did not look at Claudia. He looked at Vivian, and then at the judge. And then he looked at his folder with the expression of a man about to do something that is 12 years overdue. Vivian walked him through it the way you walk through a structural assessment, starting at the foundation, working upward, not skipping anything, not hurrying past the things that are hardest to look at. The flagged ventilation filters. The meeting in Martin Langford's office. The ultimatum. The signed service extension. The 3 days between the authorization and the explosion. The loading dock. Benny carrying lunch. "Mr. Dawson," Vivian said, "I'm showing you Defense Exhibit 9. Can you identify this document?" "That is the service cycle extension authorization for Building C ventilation," Ray said. "Signed on the 14th. 3 days before the explosion. Vivian placed it before the judge. Thorne read it once. Then he read it again. And the second reading was slower, which told me more than the first. When he looked up, he read a portion aloud, in the flat, careful voice of a person encountering something they had not been prepared for. Ordered removal of ventilation maintenance protocol. Cited budget constraints. He studied the signature, ML. He looked toward the gallery. Is that your signature, Mr. Langford? Martin sat very still. His face had the color and texture of old concrete. Hargrove rose. Your Honor, I must object. This matter is entirely collateral to the question of guardianship. It is not collateral at all. Vivian's voice did not change temperature. The man who signed that authorization caused the injury that made Leonard Whitfield vulnerable. The woman managing this family's finances has been using Leonard's inheritance to keep that document out of public view for 12 years. This speaks directly to the fitness of both parties to serve in any protective capacity over my client's son. Claudia stood up. I didn't know. The careful calibration was gone from her voice. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any of this. Martin handled the plant's operations entirely independently. I was not involved. Mrs. Langford, Vivian said. You testified under oath 20 minutes ago that you managed this family's finances. She lifted the second set of documents from the table. Then let us examine your records. She placed the ledger photographs before the judge and spoke as he reviewed them methodically, without editorial, letting the numbers carry their own weight. 2 sets of accounts. $240,000 transferred from the Oaks building rental income into Langford family accounts across 8 months. A line item labeled ML Legal Expenses paid from money designated in a property deed filed 12 years ago for the future care of a blind man named Leonard Whitfield. Offshore transfers, hotel operational costs, a vehicle payment, a gala underwritten by a man's inheritance while that man slept in a van 6 blocks from the building generating his money. The judge stopped writing. He was simply reading. Then, Vivian placed the recording device on the evidence table. She pressed play. Claudia's voice came out of that small device and moved through courtroom 4 with a clarity that had nothing to do with the recording's audio quality and everything to do with the fact that it was, simply, the truth. Once the blind kid is in the system, Gene will break. He'll sign the proxy shares. And once Martin controls Okafor Industries, we own Nashville. A pause. A second voice. Isn't that illegal? And then Claudia. Who is going to believe a senile old man with sawdust in his veins over the Langford family? I own the judges. I own the doctors. Vivian stopped the playback. The room held a particular kind of silence, not the silence of an empty space, but the silence of a full one. A room in which everyone present is processing the same thing at the same time, and none of them has yet decided what to do with it. Hargrove was at his table, closing his briefcase. He did it with the deliberate movements of a man who has made a decision and is executing it without drama. The latches snapped. He stood. Mr. Hargrove, Claudia said. Her voice was almost unrecognizable from the one that had been on the recording. Where are you going? He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are leaving behind. I'm withdrawing from this representation, Mrs. Langford. Effective immediately. He picked up his briefcase. I don't represent criminals. He walked out. The door closed behind him. Not loudly, but in the way that a structural failure is sometimes not loud. A quiet settling. A small sound that means something very large is no longer in place. Claudia looked at Martin. Martin was looking at the table. He had the absolute stillness of a man who has just understood that the walls he relied on to protect him are gone. Judge Thorne set his glasses on the bench. He looked at Vivian. At me. At the woman in the navy dress who was no longer performing anything. Miss Cole, he said. You mentioned a voicemail. Vivian turned to look at me. 8 months. A van in a parking lot. $11.50 in a cup holder. Benny's hand on mine in the dark, pressing half a piece of bread into my palm. I nodded. Vivian faced the bench. "This is Nora Whitfield's voice, Your Honor," she said. "She recorded this before she died. She knew what might happen, and she prepared for it." The room was quiet in a way that courtrooms rarely are. Not the procedural quiet of a proceeding in progress with its coughs and paper movements and minor shifts, the other kind. The kind that descends when a space has been asked to hold something larger than its usual purpose. Vivian placed the recording device on the evidence table and connected it to the courtroom's audio system. She stepped back. She looked at the judge. "Your Honor," she said. "Nora Whitfield recorded this message in the final weeks of her life. She left specific instructions regarding when it was to be played. Those circumstances are these." The judge nodded once. Vivian pressed play. For a moment, there was only the ambient texture of a recording faint background hiss, the slight compression that small devices apply to the silence around a voice. And then, Nora spoke. Her voice was quieter than I remembered it, and slower, in the way that everything became slower and more careful toward the end. But it was hers. Every particular quality of it, the way she formed her vowels, the slight pause before certain words, the tone she used when she was saying something that mattered and wanted to be certain it was received. All of it was exactly hers. It reached me before I had prepared for it, which was its own kind of answer to the question of whether I had ever truly believed this moment would come. "Jean," she said, "if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and it means things went the way I was afraid they might. A breath, careful and deliberate. I need you to hear me. I did not leave you with nothing. I left you with everything you need to protect our boy. The land is yours. The truth is yours. It has always been yours. I was keeping it safe until you needed it." A shorter pause. "Fight for Benny, my love. Fight all the way to the end, the way you always do." Her voice shifted, softened at the edges, in a way I recognized from every night she had ever said goodnight to him through a closed door. "And when it's over, tell him that Mama can still hear his music." The recording ended. The room did not move. I was looking at my hands, flat on the table, and I was aware they were shaking, and I made no effort to stop them. From the row 3 back in the gallery where Janet Liu had brought Benny at Vivian's request 20 minutes before the recording played, I heard a sound. Not a word. The sound a person makes when they have heard something they recognize at a frequency that goes below comprehension, below language, below anything that requires conscious processing. The sound that arrives before thought. Benny stood up. He turned his face toward the speaker, with the absolute precision of a man whose entire world is organized by sound. His face was completely open, no composure, no management, just a 40-year-old man who had heard his mother's voice in a room full of strangers. "Mama," he said, barely audible. Just the shape of the word in his mouth. Then louder. "Mama." He stepped into the aisle. He knew exactly where I was. He had known from the moment they brought him in, because that was who Benny was. A man who navigated by the specific frequencies of the people he loved. He walked toward me without hesitation. And I stood. And he came into my arms the way he had come into them at 6 years old after a nightmare. And at 22 when his first serious girlfriend left, and at 28 in a hospital corridor when they told us what the damage meant and what it would mean for the rest of his life. I held him. He was shaking. I was shaking. I pressed my face against the side of his head and held on, and I did not say anything. Because there was nothing that needed to be said that was not already being said by the fact of holding him at all. After a while I became aware that the room was still silent. I looked up. Judge Thorne had removed his glasses. He was holding them in one hand, looking at the floor in front of the bench, not appearing to be doing anything in particular, which in a man of his apparent discipline was its own kind of statement. He put his glasses back on. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it carries when it has been briefly off duty and is returning to service. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied," he said, with prejudice. He looked at Claudia, who had not moved since the recording ended, and whose face had the quality of something that has been pressed very flat by a weight. Mrs. Langford, you are ordered to vacate the trustee position on the Whitfield estate immediately. An independent forensic accountant will be appointed to audit every transaction conducted over the past 8 months. If a single dollar is unaccounted for, you will be held in criminal contempt. He turned toward the gallery. Officers, Mr. Langford is not to leave this building. Based on the evidence presented today, I am referring the Langford chemical incident to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for immediate criminal investigation. He set his pen down. Court is adjourned. The gavel. The room broke open into sound. I did not hear most of it. I was holding my son, and around us the procedural noise of a proceeding reaching its conclusion moved at a distance, like weather happening somewhere else. "Dad," Benny said. His voice was muffled against my jacket. "That was Mom." "Yes," I said. "She was singing to me through the radio all along." He said it the way he said things, when he was certain of them, simply, without elaboration, as a statement of fact that did not require anyone's agreement. Every night in the van. That was her. I thought about the parking lot, about the crackle of the signal finding itself in the static, about every night I had killed the engine and listened to him manage the battery of that old Sony with the same precision I managed the gas, because that was who we were. Two people who husbanded small things with great care. And the music had always found us anyway. "She never stopped, Benny," I said. "She never stopped." We stood there for a moment, longer than was strictly necessary, which was exactly as long as it needed to be. Then I took his arm, and we walked out. Not as victims, not as survivors. As a father and son who had been to the bottom of a very dark well and had climbed back up, one handhold at a time, in the dark, without being entirely certain there was anything at the top. At the door I looked back. The oak paneling on the walls of courtroom 4 caught the light the way it had caught it for 22 years, the grain doing exactly what I had intended it to do when I fitted it by hand on 11 consecutive mornings. The wood was still standing, and so were we. Samuel Okafor died on a Saturday morning, 3 days after the hearing. He passed at home, in the limestone house with the dry fountain and the overtaken ivy. His nurse said he had been comfortable. His attorney said he had been lucid until the very end, which I believed, because I could not quite imagine Sam allowing anything, including his own death, to arrive on terms other than his own. I went to the funeral with Benny. It was a significant affair. Politicians, developers, business rivals, the kind of people who attend powerful men's funerals to confirm with their own eyes that the power has genuinely ended. I stood near the back, which is where I have always preferred to stand at funerals, having had enough of the front. Claudia and Martin were there too, positioned in the middle section with attorneys on either side. Martin was on bond pending the grand jury. Claudia was navigating the preliminary findings of the forensic audit, which the accountant had described, in carefully chosen language, as extensive. They both had the particular stillness of people performing composure, while every private calculation they run comes back with the same unwelcome answer. I did not look at them for long. They were already falling. Watching them fall was someone else's concern. The will was read the following Monday, in Vivian's conference room. I sat at one end of the long table. Claudia and Martin sat at the other end, with the diminished legal team they had assembled after Hargrove's departure. Their attorneys had filed a motion, claiming rights as interested parties, a strategy in the way that a person who has set fire to a building might still technically retain the right to stand on the sidewalk watching it burn. Vivian broke the seal and began. The standard provisions came first. Charitable bequests, staff allowances, the operational trust that would govern Okafor Industries through its transition. The Langfords sat through all of it without interest. They were waiting for the section that concerned them. Vivian turned a page. Regarding the real property designated in Nashville City Records as Parcel 7C, Martin sat forward. I, Samuel Okafor, being of sound mind, Do hereby address the matter of the land upon which the building known as the Langford Grand Hotel currently stands. Vivian read with the precision of someone who has understood the weight of every word in this document. As Mr. Blank Thuresimus, Martin Langford is aware, the Langford Grand Hotel was built upon land that was not purchased by the Langford family but leased from my father in 1972. The original ground lease was issued for a period of 50 years. That lease expired on the 14th of this month, the day after my death, as I had arranged. She did not look up. Upon expiration of the ground lease, all improvements constructed upon the parcel, including the building, its fixtures, and all permanent installations, revert to the landowner by operation of law. As I am the landowner, and as I am now deceased, this property passes to my designee. She looked at me. It is my belief that this land should belong to a man who understands the value of what is built upon it. A man who builds, rather than one who destroys. I designate Eugene Whitfield as sole owner of Parcel 7C and all improvements thereon. She slid the deed across the table. I looked at it. My name, in the block letters of a legal instrument, followed by sole owner. Beneath that, the property description. The address of the Langford Grand Hotel, the white oak lobby doors, the trellis on the east face of the building that had held my weight on a cold November night. Claudia's chair scraped backward. That hotel is worth $40 million. The composure she had maintained through every previous public appearance was simply gone. It is our headquarters. Our name is on the building. You cannot. The hotel is yours, I said. My voice was even. Every brick, every pane of glass, every piece of oak in the lobby. Yours. But it is sitting on my land. I set the deed flat on the table, and I am setting new terms. $5 million per month. Payable in advance. Martin stared at me with the expression of a man who has just heard something he cannot incorporate into any existing framework. That's you can't. We can't pay $5 million a month. Our current margins. Then move the building, I said. The room went quiet. You can't move a hotel, Martin said. His voice had lost its shape, the way voices do when a person has realized in real time that they are inside a situation with no exit. It's 30 stories of reinforced concrete. You cannot physically relocate it. I know, I said. Another silence. Martin looked at Claudia. Claudia was looking at me. The woman who had managed every room she had entered for 60 years was standing in a room that would not be managed, and she appeared to understand this, and it had done something to her face that I had not seen before. Jean, she said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of everything it usually carried. We're family, I had decided, in the days between the hearing and this moment, that I would say what I had to say once and not repeat it. Family is who you protect, I said. You left my blind son to freeze in a parking lot for 8 months while you collected his inheritance. You stole from my dead wife. You stood in a room and described me as sawdust in your veins. I held her gaze without effort. Sawdust builds, Claudia. It always has. And when it burns very clean. You have 30 days to pay or vacate. I picked up the deed. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button without looking back. Behind me, I heard Claudia's voice, then Martin's, higher and tighter than I had ever heard it. And then the elevator arrived, and I stepped in, and the doors closed. And the sounds from the conference room faded the way a radio signal fades when you drive away from the tower. Static. Then nothing. I had a son to pick up from the facility where he had spent the past 3 days learning the acoustics of a room that was not his, listening for a voice that had not been there. And after that, I had a center to build. It took the Langfords 3 generations to build their empire. It took one carpenter 30 days to bring it down. The forensic audit delivered its findings on a Thursday morning, and they were comprehensive enough that the lead accountant called Vivian before finishing his first cup of coffee. What he had found was not financial mismanagement. It was a decade-long layered architecture of fraud, tax evasion, and systematic theft that had been running so smoothly for so long that certain Langford employees had apparently come to believe it was simply how businesses were conducted. It was not. Martin was indicted on 4 counts of criminal negligence, causing grievous bodily harm, and multiple counts of evidence tampering and fraud. Claudia was charged with embezzlement, criminal conspiracy, and when investigators followed the offshore accounts to their endpoints, federal tax evasion. She was arrested at Nashville International Airport on a Wednesday, boarding a flight to the Cayman Islands, carrying $70,000 in jewelry, $300,000 in cash, and 2 passports, only one of which was in her legal name. The footage showed her being walked across the terminal in a powder blue coat, chin level, expression carefully arranged. She was performing composure for the cameras. It was, in the end, her final performance. Martin testified against Claudia in exchange for a reduced sentence. Claudia testified against Martin for the same reason. They dismantled each other with the same efficiency they had once applied to everything else, fighting over scraps of an arrangement they had believed was permanent. I did not go to the trials. I did not need to. The structure had come down. What happened in the rubble was someone else's concern. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in May, I sat on a wooden bench in Centennial Park and watched my son perform in public for the first time in his life. The bench was one I had built myself, from a length of white oak offered by the contractor fitting out the center's interior. He had called it a gift. I had tried to decline. He said a man who is building something for people who cannot see deserves at least one good piece of wood to sit on while he watches. I did not argue further. The Nora Whitfield Center for the Blind stood in a renovated 3-story building at the edge of the park. Wide corridors, rooms designed for sound, not the deadened acoustics of institutions, but living acoustics, the kind that let you hear where you are and feel at home. A music room, an art studio where students worked in clay and wood and textile, a garden with gravel paths that made specific sounds underfoot so that the people walking them always knew their position. I had consulted on every detail of the design. On the small cedar stage we had built for the opening, Benny stood with an acoustic guitar that Ray Dawson had sent him 2 months earlier. Ray having decided, apparently, that 12 years of guilt required something more than testimony, and that a guitar was a reasonable place to start making it right. Benny tuned the instrument by ear in under a minute, which drew a quiet sound of appreciation from the people seated on the lawn. Then he played. He played the song with no official title, the melody Nora had learned from her grandmother, that had traveled through the family the way certain things travel, not written down, not formally taught, just passed from one set of hands to the next until it arrived here, on a cedar stage in May sunlight, played by a man who had learned it through the static of a broken Sony radio in the back of a parking lot van. The lawn went quiet. Then it applauded. Benny lifted his head and turned his face in my direction precisely, without searching, the way he always found me. "Dad," he said, "did you hear that?" "Every note," I said. He smiled. "Mom taught me that one," he said. Through the radio. I sat with that for a moment. On the bench I had built. In the park. In the May morning. My son's voice reaching me across the grass. Before I close, I want to say something directly to you. A carpenter knows that every joint has a weak point. You can conceal it with finish, paint over it, make it appear solid from every angle. But the wood remembers. When enough pressure accumulates, the truth splits open along the grain. I spent too many years confusing the surface for the structure, and that confusion nearly cost me the one person who depended on me completely. Trust is not something you assign permanently because a person shares your name. It is something you watch and confirm against the evidence of what someone does when doing right costs more than doing nothing. I chose silence because I did not want conflict. And that silence almost became permanent. Family betrayal does not arrive loudly. It arrives in documents signed during grief, in voices that are warmest right before they lie, in gestures of concern that are actually inventories of what you have left. Pay attention early. Document what feels wrong. And understand that patience without boundaries is not virtue. It is surrender dressed in quieter clothing. You can take a man's money, You can take his home, his pride, his comfort. But when you take his child, you have removed the one thing that was making him careful. That is not a warning. That is just the physics of what people are made of. If something in this story touched something in you, I would be grateful to hear it in the comments. And if you know someone who is carrying something like this quietly, consider sharing it with them. Subscribing to this channel helps more stories like this one reach the people who need them. Thank you for staying until the very end. Genuinely. One final note. This story contains fictionalized elements constructed for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real events or persons is coincidental and unintended. I looked at my hands. The calluses were still there. The sawdust still in the creases of my knuckles, the way it had been for 45 years. The way I suspected it would always be. These hands had built a reception desk the whole county used. A staircase that was still standing on Belmead Boulevard. Doors for enemies. Paneling for courtrooms. A trellis that held my weight on a November night when I needed it to hold. But this bench, this single piece of white oak, fitted and finished on an April Saturday, placed at the edge of a garden where people who could not see were learning to find their way. This was the finest work I had ever done, not because of the craftsmanship, though I had been careful with it, because of what it was built for.